A young Australian woman, invisible to the eyes of the elite, prevented a disaster when she heard what she should never have heard. A plan whispered behind a half-open door forever changed the course of her life, and the life of the woman she silently served. This is a real story of quiet courage, unexpected redemption, and the transformative power of a simple gesture. Because sometimes salvation dwells in silence. Comment where you're watching from, leave your like, and follow this story to the end, because this story will touch your heart. The Brighton morning spilled gold across the polished marble floors of the Harrison estate. Kiara Matthews moved through the sprawling mansion like a ghost, her footsteps barely audible against the cool stone. At 24, she had perfected the art of invisibility. Eyes down, movements efficient, presence forgotten the moment she left a room. 6 months, she whispered to herself as she arranged fresh eucalyptus in a crystal vase. 6 months, and I'll have enough. The mansion sat perched on a cliff overlooking the Tasman Sea, its glass walls reflecting the endless azure of Australian sky and water. Inside, everything gleamed with perfection, the result of Kiara's meticulous care and attention to detail. Not that anyone noticed. In the 6 weeks she'd worked for Celeste Harrison, the fashion mogul had barely acknowledged her existence beyond a distracted nod or a hasty instruction. The distant sound of heels clicking against marble announced Celeste's approach. Kiara straightened her simple black uniform and stepped back, assuming her position of polite invisibility against the wall. Celeste Harrison swept into the room like a force of nature, tall, elegant, her silver-streaked auburn hair twisted into an immaculate chignon. At 52, she commanded attention without effort, her posture speaking of decades spent in boardrooms and on runways. Her sustainable textile empire, Celestial Fabrics, had revolutionized the fashion industry and made her one of Australia's most powerful businesswomen. "The Henderson meeting has been moved up," Celeste announced to someone on her phone, not sparing Kiara a glance. "No, that won't work. Tell them 4 o'clock or we reschedule for next week." She paused by the windows, gazing out at the tumbling waves below. "And make sure the new bamboo samples are ready. We can't afford another delay." Kiara remained still, observing the subtle signs of exhaustion in her employer's face, the tightness around her eyes, the slight droop of her shoulders when she thought no one was looking. Fame and fortune, it seemed, came with their own weight. The front door opened with a bang, shattering the mansion's careful quiet. Bryce Harrison's voice echoed through the hallway, boisterous and sharp. "Darling, where's my beautiful wife hiding?" Kiara noticed how Celeste's spine stiffened ever so slightly, how her knuckles whitened around her phone before she composed her features into a smile. "In the living room, Bryce." He appeared in the doorway, all designer suits and perfect teeth. 10 years younger than his wife, Bryce Harrison had the practiced charm of a man who had never been denied anything. His gaze slid over Kiara, as if she were furniture before landing on his wife. "There you are. I've got fantastic news." He strode across the room, planting a quick kiss on Celeste's cheek. "The Moreton Bay development is a go. The investors are in." "That's wonderful," Celeste replied, her voice measured. "When did this happen?" "Just now. We closed the deal over." "Lunch?" He loosened his tie, dropping onto the white sofa without bothering to remove his shoes. "Which reminds me, we should host a celebration dinner. Something intimate but impressive. Next Friday?" Kiara watched the subtle dance between them, his casual dominance, her careful accommodation. There was something performative about their interaction, as if they were actors who had played these roles for so long they no longer remembered any other way to be. "I'll check my calendar," Celeste said. "I believe I have the Singapore call that evening, but I can try to reschedule." "Perfect. Have your assistant sorted out." Bryce's phone chimed, and he pulled it out, instantly absorbed. "Oh, and make sure it's catered by Blackwood. Nothing else will do." Kiara slipped from the room, unnoticed as always. In the kitchen, she began preparing Celeste's afternoon tea. Earl Grey with a slice of lemon, no sugar, served in the blue porcelain cup, never the white ones. These small details formed the map of Kiara's days, each routine memorized and executed with precision. Through the open kitchen window, salt-laden breeze carried the distant crash of waves against the cliffs below. Kiara closed her eyes for a moment, allowing herself to imagine standing on those rocks, feeling the spray against her face, free from the weight of others' expectations and judgments. The kettle whistled, pulling her back to reality. As she arranged the tea tray, She caught fragments of conversation drifting from the living room. "Don't understand why you keep pushing this," Celeste was saying, her voice strained. "The company is doing extremely well following our current strategy." "Because you're thinking too small," Bryce replied, his tone suddenly sharp. "With your brand recognition and my connections, we could triple our holdings within 2 years. By cutting corners on sustainability, that's the entire foundation of Celestial. It's business, Celeste. Adaptation is survival." Kiara moved silently down the hallway, tea tray balanced perfectly in her hands. She paused at the threshold, not wanting to interrupt what had clearly become a tense discussion. Through the crack in the door, she could see Bryce standing over Celeste, his face flushed with frustration. "Sometimes I wonder if you even want to succeed anymore," he said, pacing the room. "You've become so rigid." Celeste removed her reading glasses, pinching the bridge of her nose. "Success means different things to different people, Bryce. Not everyone measures it in dollars," he scoffed. "How very convenient for someone who already has millions." Kiara cleared her throat softly, announcing her presence before entering. The atmosphere shifted instantly. Bryce stepping back, Celeste straightening in her chair, both faces assuming masks of polite detachment. "Your tea, Mrs. Harrison," Kiara said, setting the tray on the side table. "Thank you, Kiara." For a brief moment, Celeste's eyes met hers, tired, guarded, but with a flicker of something that might have been gratitude for the interruption. Bryce checked his watch with exaggerated impatience. "I should go. I have a meeting with the Turak. Investors at 5. He bent to kiss Celeste's cheek again, his manner suddenly all affection. "Think about what I said, darling. This is our chance to create a true legacy." After he left, the house fell into blessed quiet. Kiara went about her afternoon duties, laundry, meal preparation, tidying the already immaculate rooms, but her mind kept returning to the tension she had witnessed, to the subtle undercurrents flowing beneath the surface of the Harrisons' perfect life. Later, as she polished silverware in the kitchen, Celeste appeared in the doorway. Without her usual armor of business attire, dressed simply in linen pants and a loose silk blouse, she looked almost vulnerable. "Kiara," she said, her voice soft, "would you mind bringing dinner to my study tonight? I have quite a bit of work to catch up on." "Of course, Mrs. Harrison. 7:30 as usual." Celeste nodded, then hesitated, as if wanting to say something more. But the moment passed, and she turned away, leaving Kiara alone with her thoughts and the rhythmic motion of cloth against silver. Outside, the sun began its descent into the sea, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. Kiara watched it from the kitchen window, wondering what it would be like to live in a house made of glass where everything was on display. Yet somehow, nothing was truly seen. The next morning dawned grey and restless, with storm clouds gathering on the horizon. Kiara arrived at the mansion earlier than usual, driven by a strange sense of urgency she couldn't explain. The house was still asleep, wrapped in the hushed anticipation that precedes rainfall. In the kitchen, she moved with practiced efficiency, preparing the day's first pot of coffee. The Harrisons' calendar, meticulously maintained on the refrigerator door, showed a busy day ahead. Celeste had back-to-back meetings at the Celestial headquarters in Melbourne, while Bryce was scheduled for a business lunch at the Royal Brighton Yacht Club. Kiara had just finished setting out Celeste's breakfast, avocado toast, sliced fruit, and a small pot of Greek yogurt, when she heard the sound of raised voices coming from the master suite upstairs. She froze, coffee pot in hand, caught in the uncomfortable position of unintentional eavesdropper. "Can't keep doing this, Bryce." Celeste's voice, though muffled by distance, carried a rare edge of genuine anger. "Doing what exactly?" "Building our future." Bryce's reply was sharper, less controlled than his usual public persona. "Going behind my back, making decisions about my company without consulting me." "Our company, Celeste. Or have you forgotten our marriage vows?" The silence that followed felt weighted, dangerous. Kiara quietly set down the coffee pot and busied herself with wiping already clean countertops, trying to create enough noise to announce her presence without being obvious. Moments later, Bryce stormed down the stairs, his face tight with barely contained rage. He stopped short when he saw Kiara, seeming almost surprised to find another person in the house. "Coffee," he snapped. Not quite a question, not quite a command. "Yes, sir. It's ready. Would you like me to pour?" "You a cup?" He waved dismissively. "I'll get it myself." He yanked open the refrigerator, scanning its contents with irritation. "Where's the protein shake I left in here yesterday?" "I'm sorry, Mr. Harrison. It was past its date, so I disposed of it during yesterday's cleaning." He slammed the refrigerator door shut with unnecessary force. "Perfect. Just perfect." He grabbed a mug from the cabinet, filling it with coffee. "Does anyone in this house understand the concept of leaving things alone?" Kiara kept her eyes down, focusing on folding the dish towel in her hands into a perfect rectangle. "I apologize for the misunderstanding, sir. I'll be more careful in the future." Bryce sighed heavily, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. "No, it's fine. Just make me another one. Today, will you? The recipe is on my phone." He pulled out his mobile, scrolling through it with quick, agitated movements before placing it on the counter. "There. Follow that exactly." "Of course, Mr. Harrison." He gulped down his coffee and checked his watch. "I need to head out. Tell Celeste I'll be back late tonight. Business dinner." After he left, the house seemed to exhale, as if it, too, had been holding its breath during his presence. Kiara picked up his phone to check the protein shake recipe, only to realize he had left his actual phone on the counter. This was a spare, older, with a cracked screen protector. She hesitated, knowing she should simply leave it for him to retrieve later. But something, curiosity, instinct, or perhaps the lingering echo of that angry exchange, upstairs, made her tap the screen. It lit up, revealing not a recipe but a text conversation. "Everything in place for Friday. Once C signs the Singapore contracts, we move forward. Remember, patience. Hasty executions lead to mistakes." The reply from a contact listed only as J was equally cryptic. "The transfers are set up, untraceable. Just make sure she takes the medication as planned. Natural causes mean no questions." Kiara's hands began to tremble, the phone suddenly heavy in her grasp. She set it down carefully, exactly as he had left it, and stepped back. Her mind raced through possibilities, explanations, rationalizations, but kept returning to the unmistakable malice in those few lines of text. The medication, the Singapore contracts, Friday, just 3 days away. The sound of footsteps on the stairs snapped her back to the present. She quickly moved to the coffee maker, busying herself with cleaning the filter, as Celeste entered the kitchen, impeccably dressed in a tailored charcoal suit, her face betraying no sign of the argument that had transpired minutes before. "Good morning, Kiara," she said, her voice steady and professional. "Is that fresh coffee I smell?" "Yes, Mrs. Harrison, and your breakfast is ready." Kiara gestured to the place setting at the breakfast bar, hyper-aware of Bryce's phone still sitting on the counter just feet away. Celeste sat down, spreading her napkin across her lap with deliberate grace. "Thank you. Did Bryce leave already?" "Yes, Mum. He asked me to tell you he'll be back late tonight. A business dinner." Something flickered across Celeste's face. Resignation, perhaps, or a carefully contained hurt. "Of course he will." She took a small bite of toast, chewing thoughtfully. "Kiara, I'll be in Singapore from Thursday through Saturday, the final negotiations for our new eco-textile plant. Would you mind keeping an eye on things here? Bryce tends to, well, let's just say housekeeping isn't his strong suit." Thursday through Saturday, spanning Friday, the day mentioned in the texts. "Of course, Mrs. Harrison," Kiara replied, her voice surprisingly steady despite the thundering of her heart. "Will Mr. Harrison be joining you in Singapore?" Celeste shook her head. "No, he has meetings here he can't reschedule." She smiled faintly. Apparently, as Celeste ate her breakfast in silence, Kiara's mind worked furiously. The phone still sat on the counter, incriminating and dangerous. If she mentioned what she had seen, would Celeste believe her? A housekeeper accusing the husband of one of Australia's wealthiest women. And if she stayed silent, the storm that had been threatening all morning finally broke, rain lashing against the windows in violent sheets. In the sudden dimness, Celeste looked up, her gaze finding Kiara's with unexpected directness. "Looks like we're in for quite a storm," she said softly. Kiara nodded, unable to shake the feeling that they were speaking about something else entirely. "Yes, Mom, I believe we are." The rain continued throughout the day, transforming the manicured gardens of the Harrison estate into a glistening, waterlogged landscape. Kiara moved through her duties in a daze, the discovered text messages replaying in her mind like a persistent nightmare. By early afternoon, Bryce had returned briefly to collect his forgotten phone, barely acknowledging Kiara as he snatched it from the counter where she had left it untouched. His casual indifference only heightened her unease. How could someone planning something so sinister act so normal? Natural. Causes mean no questions. The phrase haunted her as she folded fresh linens in the laundry room, its implications becoming more terrifying with each passing hour. At 3 o'clock, Celeste returned from her meetings, looking drained but determined. She settled in her home office, a sleek space overlooking the churning sea, now grey and forbidding under the stormy sky. Kiara brought her tea and a light snack, studying her employer's face surreptitiously for any sign that might guide her next actions. "Is everything all right, Kiara?" Celeste asked suddenly, looking up from her laptop screen. "You seem troubled today." The question caught Kiara off guard. In 6 weeks, this was perhaps the first time Celeste had noticed anything about her, beyond her ability to perform her duties. "I'm fine, Mrs. Harrison," she replied automatically. "Just concerned about the weather. The forecast says the storm might worsen overnight." Celeste nodded, though her eyes, sharp and assessing, suggested she wasn't entirely convinced. "Yes, they're saying it could be quite severe. Would you prefer to leave early today? I wouldn't want you driving in dangerous conditions." The offer of consideration was unexpected, almost jarring in its normalcy against the backdrop of what Kiara now knew, or thought she knew. "That's very kind, but I'll be fine. I take public transport, and my flat isn't far from the station." "I see." Celeste removed her reading glasses, rubbing the bridge of her nose. "Where is it that you live, Kiara? I realize I've never asked." "St. Kilda, ma'am. I share a flat with 2 other girls near the Esplanade." "St. Kilda," Celeste repeated, a small smile touching her lips. "I lived there once, you know, many years ago, when I was just starting out, before all this." She gestured vaguely at the opulent surroundings. This glimpse into Celeste's past, this moment of unexpected connection, made Kiara's burden suddenly heavier. The woman before her wasn't just a wealthy employer or a fashion icon. She was a human being with a history, with struggles and triumphs that had led her to this point. "It's a lovely area," Kiara offered, uncertain how to navigate this new territory of personal conversation. "It is," Celeste agreed. "Vibrant. Real. Sometimes I miss that authenticity." She seemed about to say more, then shook her head slightly, as if remembering herself. "Well, thank you for the tea. I have quite a bit of work to finish before my trip." As Kiara turned to leave, the weight of her knowledge pressing against her chest like a physical thing, Celeste spoke again. "Kiara, if you ever need anything, if there's ever anything wrong, you can tell me. I hope you know that." For a breathless moment, Kiara considered unburdening herself right then, laying out the suspicious texts, her fears, her horrible certainty that something was terribly wrong. But the moment passed, her courage faltering before it could fully form. "Thank you, Mrs. Harrison. I appreciate that." That evening, as Kiara prepared to leave, the storm intensified. Rain pounded against the windows with renewed fury, and wind howled around the corners of the mansion like a living thing. Bryce had not returned, and Celeste had retreated to her bedroom with a migraine, leaving Kiara alone in the vast, empty house. In the quiet kitchen, she made a decision. She couldn't leave. Not yet. Not without doing something. If she was wrong, she would face the consequences. But if she was right and did nothing, with trembling hands, she took out her phone and composed a text to her flatmate. "Working late tonight. Don't wait up. We'll explain tomorrow." Then, moving with purpose, she began to search. Not obviously, nothing disturbed, nothing moved from its place, but methodically, carefully, her eyes cataloguing everything that seemed unusual or out of place. In Bryce's study, she found nothing incriminating, just the usual trappings of wealth and privilege: business magazines, golf, trophies, a humidor of expensive cigars. His desk drawers were locked, but the key was hidden predictably in the potted plant beside his chair. Inside, she found financial documents, property deeds, and a small black notebook filled with handwritten figures and initials that meant nothing to her. Nothing overtly suspicious, yet the sheer volume of financial information stored away from Celeste's eyes spoke volumes about their relationship. As the clock struck 9, Kiara heard the front door open and close. Quickly replacing everything exactly as she had found it, she slipped out of the study and made her way toward the kitchen, adopting the air of someone finishing up routine tasks. Bryce appeared in the hallway, rain-drenched and irritable. He stopped short when he saw her. You're still here? Yes, sir. Mrs. Harrison asked me to prepare some items for her trip before leaving. I'm just finishing up now. The lie came easily, born of necessity. He studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. Where is my wife? She retired early, sir. A migraine, she said. I see. He loosened his tie, a gesture Kiara had observed countless times, but which now seemed somehow threatening. Well, don't let me keep you. I'm sure you're eager to get home in this weather. Yes, sir. Good night, Mr. Harrison. As she gathered her things, Kiara felt his eyes on her back, calculating, assessing. Had she given herself away somehow? Did he suspect her suspicions? Outside, the storm had rendered the night nearly impenetrable. Rain fell in blinding sheets, and the wind tore at her coat with violent hands. But instead of heading down the long driveway toward the main road, Kiara circled around to the service entrance at the rear of the property. There, sheltered by a small overhang, she settled in to wait. She didn't know exactly what she was waiting for, only that she couldn't leave Celeste alone in the house with him tonight, not after what she had read, not with the Singapore trip just hours away. Time passed slowly. The rain eventually eased to a steady drizzle, and the wind died down to occasional gusts that rattled the branches of nearby trees. Through the kitchen window, Kiara could see Bryce moving about, fixing himself a drink, checking his phone repeatedly. He seemed agitated, unsettled. At midnight, her vigil was rewarded. Bryce left the kitchen and headed upstairs, not toward the master bedroom where Celeste slept, but to his study. Minutes later, he emerged with a small object in his hand, too distant for Kiara to identify clearly, but something that he slipped carefully into his pocket before making his way toward the stairs. Kiara's heart pounded so loudly she was certain it would give her away, even through the walls and windows that separated them. As Bryce disappeared up the staircase, she made a split-second decision. Using her key, she quietly let herself back into the house. The mansion's interior was bathed in shadows, the only illumination coming from the small accent lights along the hallway. Kiara removed her shoes, moving silently across the marble floors she had polished just hours earlier. Every creak, every whisper of fabric seemed magnified in the midnight quiet. From upstairs came the sound of a door opening, the master suite. Kiara pressed herself against the wall, barely breathing, as Bryce's footsteps moved across the upper landing. He was speaking, his voice too low to make out the words, but the tone unmistakably gentle, coaxing. Celeste's reply was muffled, drowsy, the voice of someone pulled from deep sleep. Kiara began to climb the stairs, placing her feet with exquisite care on the edges of each step where the wood was less likely to protest. Halfway up, she froze as Bryce's voice became suddenly clear. You need to rest properly before your flight, darling. The doctor said these would help with the migraines and the insomnia. I don't remember the doctor mentioning new medication. Celeste's voice was clearer now, edged with confusion. At your last appointment, you were distracted with the Singapore negotiations, but I made sure to ask about your sleeping troubles. Trust me, this will help. Just a small white pill with water. Kiara crept higher, her heart hammering against her ribs. At the top of the stairs, she could see through the partially open door of the master bedroom. Celeste was sitting up in bed, her silver-streaked hair loose around her shoulders, looking smaller somehow without her usual armor of tailored suits and careful composure. Bryce stood beside the bed, a glass of water in one hand, the other extended toward his wife with something small and white resting in his palm. I don't know, Bryce. I don't like taking medication I'm not familiar with, especially before an important trip. Don't be difficult, Celeste. His voice hardened slightly. It's just a sleeping pill. God knows you need the rest. You look terrible lately. Kiara watched as something flickered across Celeste's face. Hurt, quickly masked by a flash of indignation. Thank you for that assessment, she said dryly. You know what I mean. He sat on the edge of the bed, his posture softening. I'm worried about you, these migraines, the insomnia. You're pushing yourself too hard. The Singapore deal will be fine, but you need to be at your best. His concern seemed genuine, making Kiara doubt herself for a moment. Was she misinterpreting everything? Had the stress of her own precarious life circumstances made her paranoid, seeing threats where none existed? But then she remembered the texts. Natural causes, no questions. She must have made some small sound, a sharp intake of breath perhaps, because Bryce suddenly turned toward the doorway, his expression sharpening. Is someone there? he called. Without thinking, Kiara pushed the door open wider and stepped into view. "I'm sorry to disturb you, Mr. and Mrs. Harrison. I thought I heard someone call for assistance." The look on Bryce's face shifted from surprise to irritation to a careful neutrality in the space of seconds. "Kiara, what are you doing here at this hour?" I forgot my transport card," she improvised. "I came back to retrieve it and heard voices. I apologize for the intrusion." Celeste sat up straighter, pulling her silk robe closer around her shoulders. "It's very late, Kiara. You should have called rather than coming all the way back in this weather." "Yes, Mom, I'm sorry." Bryce stood, slipping the white pill into his pocket with a smoothness that might have gone unnoticed by anyone not looking for it. "Well, you have what you came for. I'll see you out." "Actually," Kiara said, her voice steadier than she felt, "I wanted to ask Mrs. Harrison about the breakfast arrangements for tomorrow since she has an early flight." It was a flimsy excuse, but it gave her a reason to remain. Bryce's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Surely that can wait until morning," he said. "It's all right, Bryce," Celeste interjected, studying Kiara with newfound interest. "It will only take a moment." To Kiara, she added, "I'll have my usual breakfast at 6. The car is coming at 7:30. "Yes, Mum. And would you like me to pack any additional items for your trip? I noticed your travel humidifier isn't with your luggage." This was a calculated move. Kiara had indeed seen the small device still sitting on Celeste's vanity, but the real purpose was to establish herself as indispensable in this moment to create a reason for her continued presence. "Oh, thank you for reminding me. Yes, I'll need that." Celeste turned to Bryce. "Darling, why don't you go down and make sure all the doors are locked? It seems we've had quite the night of comings and goings." For a moment Bryce looked as if he might refuse, but then he nodded curtly. "Of course, don't be too long, Kiara. It's very late and we all need our rest." As his footsteps receded down the hallway, Celeste fixed Kiara with a penetrating gaze. "Now what's really going on? And don't tell me it's about breakfast or humidifiers." The directness of the question left Kiara momentarily speechless. This was the moment, the point of no return. Once spoken, her suspicions could never be taken back, and the fragile structure of her life here would be irrevocably altered. "Mrs. Harrison," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, "I don't think you should take any medication Mr. Harrison gives you, especially not tonight." Celeste's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes sharpened. "And why is that?" "This morning Mr. Harrison left his phone in the kitchen. I saw messages about you, about the Singapore contracts, about ensuring natural causes." The words hung in the air between them, impossible to retrieve. Celeste was silent for so long that Kiara began to fear she had made a catastrophic mistake. Then, very quietly, she asked, "Show me where his phone is now." "He has it with him now," Kiara replied, her voice barely audible. "But I saw the messages clearly. They mentioned the Singapore contracts, your medication, and ensuring everything would look like natural causes." A peculiar stillness came over Celeste's face, not disbelief or shock, but something more complex, as if pieces of a puzzle she had long been contemplating were finally sliding into place. "I see," she said simply. Then, after a measured pause, "And you came back here tonight because I was worried," Kiara admitted. "I couldn't leave knowing what might happen. I know it sounds crazy. I'm just your housekeeper, and these are serious accusations, but—" "Stop!" Celeste held up a hand, her gaze suddenly piercing. "Don't diminish yourself. Just a housekeeper. You're a human being who potentially witnessed something dangerous and chose to act. That takes remarkable courage." From downstairs came the sound of Bryce moving about, checking doors and windows as Celeste had requested. They didn't have much time. "What did the messages say exactly? As precisely as you can remember?" Celeste asked, her voice taking on the focused clarity that had likely served her well in countless boardrooms. Kiara closed her eyes briefly, summoning the words that had burned themselves into her memory. The first one said something like, "Everything in place for Friday. Once C signs the Singapore contracts, we move forward. Remember patience. Hasty executions lead to mistakes." And the reply? "The transfers are set up, untraceable. Just make sure she takes the medication as planned. Natural causes mean no questions." Celeste absorbed this information with remarkable composure, only the slight whitening of her knuckles against the bedsheet betraying any emotional response. "Who was the correspondent?" It just said J, no full name. Julian, Celeste murmured almost to herself. It would be Julian. Footsteps on the stairs announced Bryce's return. Celeste's gaze snapped to Kiara's, suddenly urgent. The humidifier, get it quickly and then leave. Say nothing more tonight, come early tomorrow. 5:30 before he wakes. We'll talk then. Kiara nodded and moved swiftly to the ensuite bathroom, locating the small travel humidifier on the marble vanity. By the time Bryce reappeared in the doorway, she was already on her way out, the device in hand. All sorted then? He asked, his tone pleasant but his eyes watchful. Yes, sir. Thank you for your patience. I'll add this to Mrs. Harrison's luggage in the morning. How are you getting? Home at this hour? His question seemed born of genuine concern, making Kiara's insides twist with uncertainty. Could she have misinterpreted everything? Was it possible the texts had some innocent explanation? I've called a ride-share, she lied smoothly. It should be here any minute. Good. It's not safe for a young woman to be out alone this late. He glanced at his wife. Celeste, you should. Try to get some sleep, it's nearly 1. Yes, I should. Celeste's voice was neutral, betraying nothing of the conversation that had just transpired. Good night, Kiara. Thank you for your thoroughness. As Kiara made her way down the stairs, Bryce followed a few steps behind, not obviously escorting her out, but not allowing her to linger either. At the front door, he waited while she slipped on her shoes and gathered her bag. You're a dedicated employee, Kiara, he said, his tone conversational. Celeste is fortunate to have you. Thank you, sir. I'm fortunate to work here. Yes, well. He opened the door, the night air rushing in, cool and damp from the recent rain. Sometimes I think Celeste collects people, loyal, hard-working people who adore her. It's a gift, really. There was something unsettling in his phrasing, as if Celeste were a child hoarding toys, as if the people who respected her were somehow diminished by that respect. She's an admirable person, Kiara replied carefully. Admirable, he echoed, a faint smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Yes, I suppose she is. Good night, Kiara. Safe journey home. She didn't call a rideshare. Instead, once the mansion's lights dimmed and the property fell silent, she made her way to the small groundskeeper's shed at the edge of the estate. It was unlocked, as she'd known it would be. She'd helped the weekly gardener store equipment there just yesterday. Inside, it was dry and relatively clean, if a bit cramped with lawnmowers and gardening tools. Settling onto a stack of burlap sacks in the corner, Kiara set an alarm on her phone for 5 a.m. and tried to find a position comfortable enough for a few hours' rest. Sleep seemed impossible with her mind racing through the day's revelations, yet exhaustion eventually pulled her under into a fitful slumber, filled with disjointed dreams of falling and being unable to cry out. The alarm jolted her awake while it was still dark outside. Stiff and disoriented, Kiara took a moment to remember where she was and why. Then, gathering her things, she slipped out of the shed and made her way back toward the main house, her footsteps quiet on the dew-damp grass. The kitchen door opened to her key, and she entered the silent mansion with the practiced ease of someone accustomed to moving through spaces without disturbing them. She put on coffee, first, both to maintain the appearance of normal routine and because she desperately needed the caffeine after her uncomfortable night. As the coffee brewed, she began preparing Celeste's breakfast, laying out her preferred dishes and cutlery with methodical precision. The familiar routine calmed her frayed nerves, giving her hands something to do while her mind continued to grapple with the enormity of the situation. At precisely 5:30, Celeste appeared in the kitchen doorway, fully dressed in an elegant navy traveling suit, her hair immaculately styled, looking for all the world as if the previous night's conversation had never happened. Only the slight shadows beneath her eyes, partially concealed by expertly applied makeup, hinted at a restless night. "Good morning, Kiara," she said, her voice pitched low. "Is Bryce awake?" "No, ma'am. I haven't heard any movement from upstairs." Celeste nodded, visibly relaxing. "Good. We don't have much time." She gestured toward the breakfast nook, a small, cozy space overlooking the eastern gardens, where the first light of dawn was just beginning to illuminate the landscape. "Join me, please." It was a request that would have been unthinkable 24 hours ago, the lady of the house inviting her housekeeper to sit with her as an equal. Kiara hesitated only briefly before following, bringing 2 cups of coffee with her. As they sat across from each other, Celeste studied Kiara's face with new attention, as if seeing her clearly for the first time. "You didn't go home last night, did you?" Kiara shook her head. I stayed. In the groundskeeper's shed. I was worried about leaving you alone. A complex emotion flickered across Celeste's features. Surprise, perhaps, or a kind of touched bewilderment at being the object of such concern from someone she barely knew. That was extraordinarily kind and unnecessary. I didn't take the pill he offered. I'm glad, Kiara said simply, but I still think you shouldn't go to Singapore. Not until we understand what's happening. Celeste's lips curved in a small, tight smile. Oh, I'm not going to Singapore. At least, not in the way Bryce expects. She took a sip of her coffee, her gaze steady over the rim of the cup. Kiara, what I'm about to tell you may sound paranoid, but I've suspected for some time that things in my marriage aren't what they seem. The garden. Beyond the breakfast nook's windows was coming alive with early morning light, casting long shadows across the manicured lawns. Inside, the two women sat in a bubble of shared conspiracy, their voices barely above whispers. 6 months ago, Celeste continued, I noticed discrepancies in some of our joint accounts, small at first, then increasingly significant. When I questioned Bryce, he had plausible explanations, investments, property developments, business expenses. She traced the rim of her coffee cup with one manicured finger, her gaze distant. I wanted to believe him. It's easier, isn't it, to trust the person you've built a life with, even when the evidence suggests you shouldn't. Kiara nodded, thinking of her own past disappointments. The scholarship that had fallen through, the family who had promised support then vanished, the boyfriend who had sworn love while emptying her savings account. But the explanations didn't add up, Celeste went on. The investments never materialized, the property developments remained suspiciously vague, and then I discovered he'd taken out a second mortgage on our Melbourne apartment, a property that's solely in my name. How is that? Possible? Kiara asked. Forged signatures. Excellent forgeries, but forgeries nonetheless. Celeste's voice was matter-of-fact, as if discussing a minor inconvenience rather than a profound betrayal. When I confronted him, he broke down, claimed financial difficulties with his own ventures, swore he'd meant to tell me, and like a fool I believed him, or wanted to believe him. She paused, taking another sip of coffee. I didn't press charges. Instead, I quietly began separating our finances, moving my assets into more secure positions. The Singapore deal is part of that, a restructuring that places Celestial Fabrics firmly under my sole control. And he knows this, Kiara asked. He knows something is happening. The specifics, no, I've been careful. Celeste set down her cup with deliberate precision. What I didn't realize, what your discovery makes clear, is how desperate he's become, or how dangerous. From upstairs came the faint sound of movement, Bryce beginning to stir. Both women tensed, then Celeste continued, her words coming faster now. The contracts I'm meant to sign in Singapore would indeed secure my company's future, but they would also finalize the separation of my personal assets from anything Bryce could access. Once those papers are signed, he loses any claim to the fortune he's become accustomed to. So the message is, Kiara began, we're discussing a way to ensure I never sign those contracts, a convenient natural death before I can complete the separation. Celeste's calm was remarkable, almost unnerving. I suspected he might try something, but I thought I had more time. I thought he'd fight legally first. We need to call the police, Kiara said firmly. Celeste shook her head. With what evidence? Text messages you glimpsed once on a phone we no longer have access to? A white pill that could be exactly what he claimed, a sleeping aid? Bryce is charming, connected, and very, very good at appearing the devoted husband. But he tried to... We don't know what he tried, not definitively. And making accusations without irrefutable proof would only alert him that I know. She leaned forward, her eyes intense. I need those Singapore contracts signed. I need my company and my assets secured before I confront what my marriage has become. The sound of the shower running upstairs punctuated her words. They had perhaps 15 minutes before Bryce would join them. So what do we do? Kiara asked, a strange calm settling over her. Somehow, in the space of 24 hours, she had become part of a we with this woman she had served silently for weeks. I have a plan, Celeste said, but it requires your help and it's asking a great deal. You could simply walk away, find another position, forget what you've seen. I wouldn't blame you. Kiara thought of walking away, returning to her cramped flat, to the endless search for work that paid enough to cover her student loans, to the life of careful budgeting and deferred dreams. Then she thought of Celeste, alone in this beautiful prison with a man who saw her only as a means to wealth. "What do you need me to do?" she asked simply. Relief flickered across Celeste's face, quickly replaced by focused determination. "I need to appear to go to Singapore while actually staying close by. I need someone monitoring Bryce's movements, someone he won't suspect, and I need to find concrete evidence of what he's planning before he realizes I'm onto him." "You want me to spy on him?" Kiara clarified. "I want you to continue exactly as you have been, invisible, efficient, unremarkable, but yes, observing, listening." Celeste hesitated. "It's an unfair thing to ask. If he discovered what you were doing—" "He won't," Kiara said with more confidence than she felt. "I've had plenty of practice being invisible." The shower stopped. Time was running short. "My sister has a holiday home in Sorrento," Celeste said quickly. "I'll go there instead of Singapore. As far as Bryce knows, I'll be on a 16-hour flight followed by 3 days of intensive meetings. The time difference works in our favor. I can claim to be unavailable during Melbourne's daylight hours due to being in negotiations." "How will you get there without him knowing?" "My car service is arranged through my office, not through Bryce. I'll simply change the destination once I'm out of sight of eye." "The house." She reached across the table, briefly touching Kiara's hand, the first physical contact between them. "I'll give you my private number. Call or text if anything seems suspicious, no matter how small." Kiara nodded, committing the plan to memory. "What about the white pill he tried to give you last night?" "I've hidden it. Once I'm safely away, I'll have it analyzed. If it contains what I suspect, it becomes evidence." Celeste withdrew her hand as footsteps sounded on the stairs. "Remember, everything appears normal. I'm going to Singapore. You're continuing your usual duties. Nothing has changed." They moved apart naturally, Kiara standing to refresh the coffee, while Celeste opened her laptop at the breakfast table, the picture of a busy executive preparing for a day of travel. By the time Bryce entered the kitchen, freshly showered and impeccably dressed, the conspiratorial intimacy of their conversation had been replaced by the familiar dynamic of employer and employee. "Good morning, ladies," he said cheerfully, dropping a kiss on the top of Celeste's head. "All packed and ready for the big trip?" "Nearly," Celeste replied, not looking up from her screen. "Just finalizing some details with the Singapore team." "Excellent." He poured himself coffee, his movements relaxed and confident. "I've arranged a little surprise for you at the hotel, a spa treatment for when you arrive. I know how those long flights affect your back." Kiara, busying herself with wiping down already clean countertops, marveled at his performance, the solicitous husband so concerned. For his wife's comfort. If she hadn't seen the messages, hadn't witnessed the pill incident, she might have been charmed by his thoughtfulness. "That's very kind," Celeste said, her own performance equally flawless. "Though I doubt I'll have time to enjoy it. The schedule is quite packed." "Make time," he insisted. "You work too hard. That's what I keep telling you." As the morning progressed, Kiara moved through her duties with mechanical precision, hyper-aware of every interaction between the couple, every subtle shift in tone or expression. The atmosphere in the house was charged with an electricity only she and Celeste could feel, the crackling tension of knowledge unspoken, of calculated risks and careful deceptions. At 7:25, the car service called to announce their arrival. Bryce insisted on carrying Celeste's luggage to the sleek black sedan waiting in the circular driveway. Kiara watched from the front door as husband and wife embraced in the golden morning light, a picture-perfect tableau of domestic harmony. "Safe travels, darling," Bryce said, his voice carrying clearly in the quiet morning air. "Don't worry about anything here. I've got it all under control." "I'm sure you do," Celeste replied, her smile never reaching her eyes. "I'll call when I land." As the car pulled away, Bryce stood watching until it disappeared down the winding driveway, one hand raised in farewell. Only when he turned back toward the house did Kiara glimpse what might have been his true expression, something cold and calculating that sent a shiver down her spine. The game had begun, and everything now depended on her ability to play her part without faltering. The first day passed in a strange haze of normalcy. Bryce left shortly after Celeste's departure, mentioning meetings in the city that would keep him occupied until evening. Alone in the mansion, Kiara moved through her usual tasks with heightened awareness, her senses attuned to details she might have previously overlooked. In Bryce's study, which she entered under the pretense of dusting, She noted the careful arrangement of papers on his desk, the locked drawer she had explored the night before, the expensive fountain pen positioned precisely parallel to the edge of the blotter. Everything spoke of a man who valued control, who left nothing to chance. On the mahogany bookshelf, family photographs told their own story. Bryce and Celeste at charity galas, at yacht parties, at exclusive resorts, always smiling, always perfect. But as Kiara studied them more closely, she noticed how the physical space between the couple widened in the more recent images, how Celeste's smile grew more fixed, how Bryce's hand on her waist seemed less an embrace than a gesture of possession. At 2:17 p.m., her phone vibrated with a text from an unknown number. Arrived safely. All proceeding as discussed. Any developments? Celeste. Kiara's thumbs hovered over the screen, considering her response carefully before typing. All quiet here. He left for meetings. Expected back this evening. The reply came almost immediately. Good. Continue as normal. Call only if urgent. We'll check in regularly. There was something reassuring about the businesslike tone, a reminder that despite the surreal nature of their situation, they had a plan, a purpose. By late afternoon, Kiara had completed her normal duties and begun preparations for dinner. She wasn't sure if Bryce would expect her to cook for him in Celeste's absence. Their arrangement had never explicitly covered this scenario, but maintaining routine seemed the safest course. She was chopping vegetables when her phone rang, the screen displaying the mansion's landline number. Wiping her hands quickly, she answered, Hello? Kiara, it's Bryce. His voice was warm, jovial. Listen, I'm stuck in the city. Dinner meeting with the Moreton Bay investors. Don't worry about preparing anything for me tonight. Of course, Mr. Harrison. Is there anything you'd like me to take care of before I leave? No, everything's fine. Just lock up when you go. He paused. Has Celeste called? She should have landed by now. The casualness of the question didn't mask its underlying intent. Kiara kept her voice neutral. I believe she sent an email to your shared account, sir. She mentioned something about calling when she reached her hotel. Ah, I haven't checked emails in hours. These meetings, you know how it is. Another pause. Well, if she calls the house, tell her I'll be home late. No need to wait up. Yes, sir. After hanging up, Kiara sent a quick text to Celeste. He called, asked if you'd made contact, told him you emailed. He's staying in the city for dinner meeting. Then she resumed her food preparation, but now she was cooking for herself, creating a simple meal she could eat while continuing her quiet investigation of the house. If Bryce wouldn't be home until late, she had an opportunity she couldn't waste. As twilight deepened into evening, Kiara moved methodically through the mansion, starting with the areas she knew best, the kitchen, the living spaces, Celeste's private rooms. She wasn't entirely sure what she was looking for, only that she needed to understand this household better, to see beneath its polished surface to the complex reality beneath. In Celeste's study, she found a leather-bound diary locked in the bottom drawer of the antique desk. The key was hidden inside a small decorative box on the bookshelf, a hiding place Kiara knew about only because she had seen Celeste access it once when she thought she was alone. Opening the diary felt like a violation, even under these extraordinary circumstances. Kiara hesitated, her hand hovering over the cover. This wasn't what Celeste had asked of her, to invade her privacy, to read her personal thoughts. She closed the drawer without opening the diary. Whatever evidence they needed, it wouldn't be found in Celeste's private reflections. It would be in Bryce's actions, his communications, his plans. The sound of tires on gravel startled her. Hastily returning everything to its place, she moved back to the kitchen just as headlights swept across the windows. Bryce was home, hours earlier than expected. Kiara busied herself with wiping down the counters, the picture of an employee finishing up her day's work. When Bryce entered, she looked up with carefully calibrated surprise. Mr. Harrison, you're back early. Your meeting concluded sooner than anticipated. He shrugged, loosening his tie. These things either wrap up quickly or drag on forever. Fortunately, tonight was the former. His gaze fell on the single plate and glass Kiara had used for her dinner. Were you eating here? Just a quick meal before cleaning up, sir. I hope. That's all right. Of course. He seemed distracted, glancing at his watch. Has Celeste called? No, sir, but she may have contacted your mobile directly. Right. He pulled out his phone, frowning slightly at the screen. Nothing yet. The time difference, I suppose. Kiara nodded, continuing her methodical cleaning. Singapore is 3 hours behind us. She might still be in transit to her hotel. You're quite knowledgeable about international time zones, Bryce observed, a new note in his voice. Not quite suspicion, but a sharper interest than usual. I looked it up when preparing Mrs. Harrison's travel documents, Kiara replied smoothly. I wanted to make sure I understood when would be appropriate to schedule her calls back home. Thoughtful of you. He opened the refrigerator, examining its contents before selecting a bottle of expensive mineral water. You know, Kiara, I've been meaning to ask, how did you come to work for us? Your credentials are impressive for a household position. The question, seemingly casual, felt like a test. Kiara kept her expression neutral as she recited the story Celeste already knew, her business administration degree, the economic downturn that had dried up entry-level corporate positions, the temporary pivot to household management to pay the bills. Temporary, Bryce repeated, twisting the cap off his water bottle. So, you don't see yourself doing this long-term? I'm grateful for the position, Mr. Harrison. Mrs. Harrison has been very generous. But that's not an answer to my question. Kiara met his gaze directly, sensing that to look away would be a mistake. Everyone has aspirations, sir, but I also believe in fully committing to wherever I am at present. He studied her for a long moment, then smiled, a gesture that didn't reach his eyes. Well said. Commitment is important, isn't it? In all areas of life. The conversation felt loaded with double meanings, with things unsaid. Kiara maintained her calm exterior, while her mind raced, analyzing every word, every nuance. Will you need anything else this evening, Mr. Harrison? No, thank you. You can go home. I'm sure you must be tired. As she gathered her things, Bryce remained in the kitchen, leaning against the counter, watching her with that same inscrutable expression. At the door, he spoke again. Oh, Kiara, Celeste mentioned you've been having car trouble. If you need a ride home, I'd be happy to call you a car service. The statement froze her in place. She had never mentioned car troubles to Celeste because she didn't own a car. It was a test, a trap. That's very kind, she said carefully, but the bus stop is quite convenient and I enjoy the walk. Thank you, though, for the offer. His smile widened fractionally. Of course. Good. Night, then. Good night, Mr. Harrison. As she walked down the long driveway toward the main road, Kiara felt his eyes on her back, watching from the kitchen window. Only when she had rounded the corner and was safely out of sight did she allow herself to exhale, her hands trembling slightly as she typed a message to Celeste. Something's wrong. He's asking strange questions, testing me. We need to talk. The next morning dawned clear and bright, a perfect Australian spring day that belied the tension coiling in Kiara's stomach. She had barely slept, her mind replaying the strange conversation with Bryce, searching for hidden meanings, for the exact moment when the dynamic had shifted. Celeste had responded to her text with a single instruction: come to Sorrento when you finish today. Address to follow. Tell no one. Now, as Kiara approached the Harrison estate, she forced herself to adopt the same measured pace, the same neutral expression she always wore. Nothing had changed, she reminded herself. She was still just the housekeeper, invisible and unremarkable. Bryce's car was gone from the circular driveway. A good sign. Entering through the kitchen door, Kiara moved through. Her morning routine with deliberate normalcy, starting coffee, checking the day's schedule, preparing for a day of careful observation. On the refrigerator, held by a magnet shaped like the Sydney Opera House, was a note in Bryce's handwriting. Kiara, I'll be out most of the day. Expect me back around 7. There's a package coming for Celeste. Please sign for it and leave it in her study. B. She photographed the note with her phone before continuing her work, sending the image to Celeste with a brief message. He's out for the day. Mentioned a package for you. The reply came almost immediately. I'm not expecting any packages. Be careful. The warning sent a fresh ripple of unease through Kiara. What game was Bryce playing? Was the package genuine, or another test, or something worse? She proceeded with her usual tasks, moving methodically through the house, dusting surfaces that didn't need dusting, arranging flowers that were already perfectly arranged. All the while, her mind worked on the puzzle of Bryce Harrison, what he knew, what he suspected, what he might do next. At 11:43, the doorbell rang. A courier stood on the front step, holding a small padded envelope. "Delivery for Celeste Harrison," he announced, offering his electronic pad for signature. Kiara signed, studying the package as she did so. It was unremarkable. Standard courier packaging, addressed to Celeste, with a Sydney return address she didn't recognize. "Thank you," she said, accepting the envelope with a smile. Once inside, she examined it more carefully. The weight was consistent with documents, perhaps a small book. Nothing suspicious externally. Following Bryce's instructions, she placed it on Celeste's desk, then sent another photo to Celeste. "Package arrived. Left it on your desk as instructed." This time, Celeste's response took longer to arrive, and when it did, it was brief. "Don't touch it further. Leave exactly as is." The day stretched on, quiet and uneventful. Kiara prepared a simple dinner that could be reheated when Bryce returned, then began the process of closing up the house for her departure. As she was gathering her things, her phone rang. "Celeste." "Hello?" Kiara answered, keeping her voice low despite being alone in the house. "Are you still at the property?" Celeste asked without preamble. "Yes, just about to leave." "Good. I've sent you an address in Sorrento. Can you come directly? There are developments we need to discuss. Of course, I should be there in about 2 hours, depending on traffic. Be careful not to be followed. Take public transport, then a taxi for the final leg. Pay cash." The precautions might have seemed extreme if not for the events of the past 2 days. "I understand. I'll see you soon." After hanging up, Kiara completed her preparations for departure, locking up carefully behind her. Instead of heading toward the bus stop, however, she walked in the opposite direction, toward the small shopping village a kilometer away. There, she caught a ride-share to the train station, then a train to Frankston, and finally a taxi to Sorrento, a circuitous route that would make following her virtually impossible. The address. Celeste had provided led to a secluded beach house set among native tea trees, its weathered timber exterior blending harmoniously with the coastal landscape. As Kiara approached the front door, it opened to reveal Celeste, dressed casually in linen pants and a simple blouse, her hair loose around her shoulders, looking younger somehow, less constrained. "Thank you for coming," she said, ushering Kiara inside. "Did anyone show interest in your movements?" "No, I was careful. Took different transport, paid cash for the taxi as you suggested." The interior of the beach house was warm and inviting, with polished wooden floors, comfortable furniture, and large windows overlooking the bay. It felt worlds away from the cold perfection of the Brighton mansion. "This is beautiful," Kiara said, taking in the view of moonlight rippling across dark water. "My sister bought it years ago, before property prices here went mad," Celeste explained, leading Kiara to a kitchen island where 2 glasses of wine waited. "She lets me use it when I need space." "Does she know what's happening?" "Some of it, enough to understand why I needed a safe place." Celeste handed Kiara a glass. "You must have questions." "Many," Kiara admitted, "starting with why Bryce would arrange for a package to be delivered to you when he knows you're out of the country." Celeste's expression darkened. "It's a test. He's setting a trap, though I'm not entirely sure what kind yet." She moved to a laptop open on the kitchen counter. "While you were dealing with that situation, I've been doing some investigating. So of my own, look at this." The screen showed a series of financial documents, bank statements, transfer records, incorporation papers. Kiara scanned them quickly, her business education allowing her to grasp the fundamentals of what she was seeing. "He's been moving money," she said slowly. "Large amounts through multiple channels, eventually consolidating in the Cayman Islands." "Exactly. Over $6 million so far. All traced back to my accounts, my investments, my company." Celeste's voice was tight with controlled anger. "Money I earned that he's been systematically siphoning away." "But how? Surely you'd notice withdrawals that large." "Not when they're disguised as legitimate business expenses, consulting fees, property investments." She scrolled through more documents. "Bryce has been very clever. Each transaction individually makes sense. It's only when you map them all together that the pattern becomes clear." Kiara studied the screen, following the complex web of financial movements. "And this all leads to a company called Meridian Holdings? A shell corporation with Bryce as the sole beneficiary, though his name appears nowhere on the official paperwork." Celeste closed the laptop, turning to face Kiara fully. "I believe the package delivered today contains something incriminating." Perhaps documentation of these transfers that he wants to retrieve before I return from Singapore and discover them. Or it could be something else entirely, Kiara suggested. A listening device, a camera, something to monitor the house while you're gone. Possibly. Celeste took a sip of her wine, her gaze distant. The question is, what's his endgame? If he's already secured the money, why the elaborate plan involving my natural death? Why not simply leave? Because divorce would mean financial disclosure, legal scrutiny of shared assets. Kiara was thinking aloud now, the pieces beginning to align in her mind. If you died, especially of natural causes, he inherits everything without question. No investigations, no awkward explanations about missing funds. And with me gone, the remaining assets, the bulk of my wealth, would be his to control. Celeste's voice was steady, but her hand tightened around her wine glass. It's almost elegant in its simplicity. They sat in silence for a moment, absorbing the cold calculation behind. Bryce's plan. Outside, waves crashed against the shore in a rhythmic pulse that seemed to emphasize the ticking clock they were working against. What now? Kiara finally asked. We have theories, suspicions, but no concrete proof. Now, Celeste said, her expression hardening into resolve, we get that proof, and I know exactly where to start looking. The plan they formulated that night was both simple and audacious. While Bryce believed Celeste was thousands of miles away in Singapore, she would secretly return to the mansion during his absence the following day. With Kiara keeping watch, Celeste would access the evidence they needed, financial records, correspondence, and most importantly, the mysterious package that had arrived. The risk is considerable, Celeste acknowledged as they finalized the details. If he returns unexpectedly, if he's installed surveillance, I'll create a diversion if necessary, Kiara assured her. And I've been watching closely. There's no evidence of new security measures in the house. Dawn found them driving back toward Brighton in Celeste's sister's car, a modest sedan unlikely to draw attention. They parked several streets away from the mansion and approached on foot, using the service entrance at the rear of the property. Strange, Kiara murmured as they entered the kitchen. To walk through your own home like an intruder. It hasn't felt like my home for some time, Celeste replied, her voice soft but resolute. They moved through the silent house with practiced quiet, Kiara leading the way to Celeste's study, where the package waited. It sat untouched on the desk, innocuous in its ordinary appearance. Celeste examined it without touching, then reached into her bag for a pair of latex gloves. Let's see what my husband considers important enough to risk sending to an empty house. Using a letter opener, she carefully slit the package open. Inside was a USB drive and a handwritten note that read simply, Review. Immediately. Destroy after. Interesting, Celeste murmured. Not his handwriting. Julian's, I'd guess. She moved to her computer, powering it on and inserting the drive. A folder opened automatically, revealing dozens of files, financial statements, photographs, emails. Celeste clicked through them methodically, her expression growing increasingly grim. It's all here, she said finally. The entire plan laid out in detail, financial documents showing where my money has gone, instructions for how to administer a particular combination of medications that would appear to trigger a fatal heart attack in someone with my medical history. She looked up, her eyes hard, and a detailed outline for how Bryce should behave during the subsequent investigation to appear appropriately. Devastated, Kiara felt a chill at the calculated coldness of it all. Can you copy these files? As evidence? Better than that. Celeste removed a small device from her bag. This will create a perfect digital clone of the drive, preserving all metadata, timestamps, everything a forensic investigator would need. As she worked, Kiara kept watch at the study door, listening for any sign of Bryce's unexpected return. The house remained quiet, the only sounds the gentle hum of the computer and the distant crash of waves against the cliffs below. There's more, Celeste said suddenly. Emails between Bryce and this Julian person discussing you. Kiara turned, startled. Me? Why would they be discussing me? Because you've been noticed. Celeste's face was tense as she read. The new housekeeper is observant, too observant. Might be wise to terminate her position after everything is settled. She looked up, meeting Kiara's gaze. They saw you watching. They just underestimated what you might do with what you saw. A cold weight settled in Kiara's stomach. So I was right to be concerned. More than right. You may have saved both our lives. Celeste removed the cloning device and the original USB. We have what we need now. Let's... The distant sound of the garage door opening cut her off mid-sentence. They froze, exchanging alarmed glances. "Bryce," Kiara whispered. "He's supposed to be in meetings all day." "No time to leave unseen," Celeste said quickly, her mind racing. "We need a different approach." She pocketed the USB clone and replaced the original in its envelope. "Follow my lead." Instead of hiding or trying to escape, Celeste straightened her posture, transformed in an instant from furtive investigator to commanding CEO. She walked purposefully into the main hallway, Kiara a step behind, just as Bryce entered from the garage. The shock on his face was almost comical. Eyes widening, mouth opening slightly, all color draining from his cheeks. "Celeste, what are you... You're supposed to be in Singapore." "Clearly I'm not," she replied coolly. "The question is, why did you think I was?" Bryce recovered quickly, his expression shifting to concern. "Darling, what happened? Why didn't you call? I've been worried sick." "Have you? How interesting." Celeste's voice was ice. "Especially since I have evidence suggesting you'd prefer me." Permanently unavailable. His gaze darted between Celeste and Kiara, calculation evident in his eyes. "Evidence? What are you talking about? And why is she here?" He gestured dismissively toward Kiara. "This is a private matter, whatever it is." "Kiara stays," Celeste said firmly. "She's the one who alerted me to your plans. She saw the text messages about ensuring my death looked like natural causes." The transformation in Bryce was instantaneous and chilling. The mask of concerned husband fell away, replaced by something cold and dangerous. "You have no idea what you're talking about. And you," he turned to Kiara, "should have minded your own business." "She did exactly what any decent human being would do," Celeste countered, "which is more than I can say for the man I married." Bryce's laugh was hollow. "The man you married? You mean the man you used as an accessory, as arm candy for your public appearances? The man who had to live in the shadow of the great Celeste Harrison, fashion pioneer and corporate darling?" "The man I supported, encouraged and shared my life with," Celeste corrected, her voice steady despite the emotion behind her words. "The man I trusted, who repaid that trust by stealing from me and plotting my death." "I built your empire with you," Bryce shouted, his careful composure cracking. "Without me, you'd still be sketching designs in that dingy St. Kilda apartment." "We both know that's not true," Celeste replied calmly. "You were a good partner once, Bryce, a good husband. But somewhere along the way, you decided that wasn't enough." His expression hardened. "What exactly do you think you know?" "Everything," Celeste said simply. "The money transfers to Meridian Holdings, the consultation with doctors about medications that could trigger heart failure, the detailed plans for how you'd handle the aftermath of my natural death." She reached into her pocket, withdrawing the USB clone. "It's all here, backed up in multiple secure locations." For a moment, Bryce seemed genuinely stunned, as if he couldn't quite believe his carefully constructed plan had unraveled so completely. Then his gaze shifted to calculation once more. "You can't prove any of that. It would be your word against mine." "Actually, I can prove all of it," Celeste countered. "Financial records don't lie, Bryce. Neither do your own emails and text messages. The police will be very interested in the contents of this drive, as will my lawyers." Something dangerous flickered in his eyes. "You wouldn't dare. The scandal would destroy Celestial Fabrics, everything you've built." "Perhaps," Celeste acknowledged. "Or perhaps people would admire my courage in standing up to a man who tried to kill me for my money. Either way, I'd rather rebuild my company from scratch than live one more day in fear of my husband." The standoff stretched between them, tense and electric. Kiara remained silent, watchful, prepared to intervene if Bryce made any threatening move, but the fight seemed to drain from him gradually, replaced by a cold pragmatism. "What do you want?" he asked finally. "I want you gone," Celeste replied without hesitation. "Out of my house, my company, my life. You'll sign divorce papers acknowledging your financial misconduct, relinquishing all claims to my assets. In return, I won't press criminal charges. That's your offer? I walk away with nothing?" "Not nothing. Your freedom, your reputation such as it is." Celeste's voice hardened. "It's more than you deserve, But I'm not interested in a prolonged legal battle. I want this over. Bryce's gaze moved between the two women, assessing, calculating his limited options. Finally, his shoulders slumped slightly, the first genuine gesture Kiara had seen from him. "You win," he said simply. "I'll sign whatever you want." 3 months later, the Brighton mansion stood transformed. Gone were the stark white furnishings and clinical perfection that had characterized Bryce's influence. In their place were warmer colors, comfortable textures, and an overall sense of lived-in elegance that reflected Celeste's true tastes. Kiara moved through these changed spaces with newfound confidence. No longer the invisible presence she had once been, her position had evolved as well, from housekeeper to personal assistant, with responsibilities that utilized her business education and natural organizational skills. The divorce had been finalized with surprising speed and discretion. Faced with the irrefutable evidence Celeste possessed, Bryce had signed the papers without further resistance, relinquishing all claims to her assets and agreeing to a confidentiality clause that prevented him from discussing their separation publicly. In exchange, Celeste had indeed declined to press criminal charges, a decision that had prompted intense discussion between her and Kiara. "He tried to kill you," Kiara had argued during one such conversation. "He deserves to face consequences." "The legal process would be lengthy, painful, and public," Celeste had countered. "And even with our evidence, there's no guarantee he would serve significant time. This way, I control the narrative. I can move forward without being defined by his betrayal." The media had speculated briefly when the separation was announced, but Celeste's carefully crafted statement about irreconcilable differences and mutual respect had largely satisfied public curiosity. Bryce had disappeared to Europe, reportedly pursuing real estate opportunities in the south of France, as far from Australian legal jurisdiction as practically possible. On this particular morning, Kiara was organizing Celeste's schedule for an upcoming fashion sustainability conference when her employer entered the sun-filled study, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "I thought you might need this," Celeste said, placing 1 cup on the desk beside Kiara. "The itinerary for Milan looks grueling." "I've built in extra recovery time between the major events," Kiara replied, accepting the coffee with a smile. "And I've scheduled your favorite spa for the last afternoon." Always thinking ahead, Celeste settled into the chair opposite, studying Kiara with thoughtful eyes. "You know, I've been meaning to ask you something." "Yes?" "The university called yesterday about the executive MBA program. They're very interested in your application, but they mentioned you haven't completed the financial aid forms." Kiara hesitated. "I'm still considering my options. The program is expensive, and even with part-time study, the schedule would be demanding. Which is why," Celeste continued smoothly, "I'd like to propose an arrangement. Celestial Fabrics will cover your tuition in full. In return, you commit to applying your new knowledge within the company for at least 3 years after graduation." The offer caught Kiara completely off guard. "That's incredibly generous. But I couldn't possibly—" "It's not charity," Celeste interrupted firmly. "It's an investment. In you, yes, but also in my company. You have insights and perspectives I value, Kiara. Education will only enhance those qualities." The sincerity in Celeste's voice was unmistakable. This wasn't the patronizing gesture of a wealthy benefactor, but a genuine business proposal from one professional to another. "I don't know what to say," Kiara admitted. "Say yes," Celeste suggested with a smile. "Allow yourself to accept an opportunity you've earned through your own merit and courage." Outside, the Australian spring had given way to early summer, bathing the gardens in golden light. Through the open windows, the scent of jasmine drifted in on a gentle breeze, a world away from that stormy night when Kiara had first discovered the threatening text messages. "Yes," Kiara said finally. "Thank you, I accept." Celeste nodded, satisfied. "Excellent. We'll work out the details this week." She rose, moving toward the window. "There's something else I've been considering. The house in Sorrento, my sister rarely uses it anymore, and she's offered to sell it to me." "It's a beautiful property," Kiara observed. "It is, and it represented safety when we most needed it." Celeste turned, her expression thoughtful. "I'm thinking of using it as a retreat center for women rebuilding their lives after abusive relationships, a place where They can find their footing, make plans, connect with resources. The idea resonated deeply with Chiara, who understood all too well how precarious security could be, how quickly one's life could be upended by betrayal. That sounds wonderful. Would you be interested in helping develop the concept? Your perspective would be valuable, especially as you progress in your studies. I'd be honored, Chiara replied honestly. Later that afternoon, as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, Chiara found herself standing on the cliff edge of the property, watching waves crash against the rocks below. The salty breeze tugged at her hair, carrying with it the promise of change, of possibility. Behind her the mansion stood, no longer a gilded cage or a stage for careful performances, but simply their home, a place of truth. Her phone vibrated with a text message from Noah, the landscape architect she had met through Celeste's sister's partner, confirming their dinner plans for that evening. His warmth and straightforward nature had been a balm after the deceptions she had navigated, and their relationship was developing, with an honesty that felt revolutionary. As she typed a reply, Celeste joined her at the cliff's edge, silent but companionable. For a moment they simply stood together, watching the endless dance of sea and sky. "Do you ever regret it?" Chiara asked finally. "Not the divorce, but keeping his secrets, allowing him to simply walk away?" Celeste considered the question carefully. "I regret the years I spent ignoring signs I should have heeded. I regret not trusting my own instincts sooner." She shook her head slightly. "But the end? No. Justice takes many forms, Chiara. He lost everything he truly valued: status, wealth, connections, and I gained something invaluable." "What's that?" "The freedom to be seen," Celeste replied simply, "to live without pretense or fear. And," she added with a smile, "a friendship I never expected." The words hung in the air. Between them, honest and unadorned. From invisible housekeeper to trusted confidant and colleague, their journey had been unlikely by any measure, forged in crisis, but sustained by genuine respect. "I should get ready for my date," Chiara said, after a comfortable silence. "Yes, don't keep Noah waiting. He strikes me as one of the good ones." "I think so too," Chiara agreed, "though I'm in no rush. I've learned to trust my instincts." As she walked back toward the house, Chiara reflected on the strange path that had led her here, how a moment of accidental discovery had changed everything, how courage found in desperation had transformed into a more sustainable, everyday kind of bravery. The mansion no longer intimidated her. The future, with its university classes and increased responsibilities, excited rather than daunted her. And the knowledge that she had faced genuine danger and emerged stronger gave her a quiet confidence that informed every step. Behind her, Celeste remained at the cliff's edge, silhouetted against the spectacular sunset. Two women whose lives had intersected by chance, bound now by shared secrets and mutual respect. Each had saved the other in different ways, Chiara through her watchful observation and willingness to speak difficult truths, Celeste through her recognition of Chiara's worth and her determination to create something meaningful from their shared ordeal. As the last light of day painted the sky in shades of amber and rose, Chiara paused at the terrace door looking back. In that moment, she understood something essential. Sometimes salvation comes not in dramatic rescues, but in the quiet courage of seeing clearly and speaking truth. Sometimes the most powerful act is simply refusing to look away when others would prefer you remain blind. And sometimes the voice that saves everything is the one that has been silent for too long.